Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm going to be discussing the Delphi case again. Today in specific I want to discuss something that's a little bit more subjective than I normally talk about on my channel, but I thought it was something interesting that I've wanted to discuss for quite some time. Today I want to talk about this.
I recently watched a movie called The Shack. And there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity. To the murderer, I believe you have just a little bit of a conscience left.
So this press conference was something that was not done on the spur of the moment. It was a big deal. It was coordinated, scripted, planned out in advance. The police knew that the killer was going to be watching the conference, and they even thought it was possible that he might actually attend.
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room.
Briefing, it seemed like you were speaking directly to whoever did this, with the sense that that person might even be in the room. Yes. Do you think that person was in the room?
I think if he wasn't in the room, he was close by, but I'm 100% convinced he was watching.
The police believed it was such a possibility that the killer might actually show up to the press conference that they had a sign-in sheet at the door. They gave 4 days notice before they held it. They covered the new sketch in a red sheet, and the whole thing was orchestrated and elaborate. A lot of effort went into it, and it's almost certain that it was scripted well in advance by profilers in the FBI and the Indiana State Police, which is why I can't help but think that the Shack comment had some importance to it.
I recently watched a movie called The Shack. And there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity.
They were sending a message directly to the killer. Now, before you think that I'm suggesting that Doug Carter was referring to an actual physical location or shack, let me start by saying that's not what I think at all. I also think that there's an argument that could be made that Doug is just a religious guy who saw the movie and just brought it up randomly at the press conference, but that just seems so unrealistic to me given how scripted and choreographed the whole thing was. I think it was deeper than that, and I think it might possibly tell us something about the killer. So I'm going to show a clip that gives a brief explanation of what the movie's actually about. And, ironically, I think the clip I'm about to show you is exactly why the police mentioned the Shack at the press conference that day.
What do you want to happen though at this point?
Well, have you seen the Shack?
I have not, but my father read the book, and I've heard parts of it, but not enough to know, like, what about, tell me how it relates.
So, the little girl is taken from her family and she is raped and murdered. And in a way, I've always seen myself as the father because he drifts away from God back and forth, which I do too in some ways. But then they don't find the girl, and then he dies and goes to heaven. And while he's there, God shows him how to forgive.
So, first, the family is absolutely not involved in this case, period. I don't want anything I say to be taken out of context here at all. I think, much like the press conference, the police believe the killer is watching everything he can about the case and almost certainly saw Kelsey's interview where she mentioned the Shack. What are the odds that Doug Carter just so happened to refer to an obscure Christian movie that a family member made a reference to in an interview months prior? I don't think it was a coincidence at all. But why this movie in specific? It almost feels like they knew the killer had seen the movie. This is a movie that almost certainly was watched in churches or attended by church groups, and Delphi's got a pretty sizable religious community, especially given the nature of the movie and what had happened in their town. I would almost bet money that church groups watched this movie in Delphi. I believe numerous statements made by the police suggest that this person is involved in the church. Take a moment to consider this statement made during the press conference.
I believe you have just a little bit of a conscience left.
What a weird thing to say. This was scripted in advance. It would be extremely unlikely for Doug to go off the cuff and start referencing random religious movies, books, and suggesting the killer has a conscience for no reason. True psychopaths lack proper empathy. That doesn't mean they don't feel anything at all, but they tend to mostly mimic the empathy that they know that they're supposed to feel. They know something's wrong with them, and they'll often do their best to try to fit in and appear as normal as possible. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, was actually the president of his church. Dennis Rader actually later referred to the time that he spent as a Boy Scout leader and the president of his church as cover stories.
A question to you. What will those closest to you think of when they find out that you brutally murdered 2 little girls? 2 children. Only a coward would do such a thing. We believe you are hiding in plain sight.
A true psychopath tends towards activities that they feel can help them blend in. They gravitate towards jobs or volunteer work that make them appear as extremely good people. Ted Bundy volunteered for a suicide hotline. John Wayne Gacy was deeply involved in politics and performed as a clown. Dennis Rader was the president of his church. Even a current Delphi suspect, Thomas Bruce, was at one time a minister. The comments made during the press conference lend to the idea that the police believe that Bridge Guy is this type of person, that they're the type of killer that the neighbors and friends that they have would never expect, someone who wants to blend in and feign empathy.
What will those closest to you think of when they find out that you brutally murdered 2 little girls? 2 children. Only a coward would do such a thing.
I believe Doug Carter is almost spelling it out for us. This person is local. They're from the Delphi area.
We also believe this person is from Delphi, currently or has previously lived here, visits Delphi on a regular basis, or works here.
This is someone who most likely closely follows the case. They watch our videos here on YouTube. They've watched the press conferences, and they most likely keep how closely they follow this case a secret.
What do you want? What do you want to happen to him at this point?
Well, have you seen The Shack?
I recently watched a movie called The Shack. And there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity.
This is someone capable of blending in, someone who's able to feign empathy convincingly enough that they were able to at least remain local for a period of time without being identified.
We also believe this person is from Delphi, currently or has previously lived here, visits Delphi on a regular basis, or works here.
This is someone who is possibly involved in a local church, or outwardly expresses religious thoughts and feelings a lot. And much like Dennis Rader, it's their cover story.
I believe you have just a little bit of a conscience left. And there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity.